Hi everyone, and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast, coming to you from Knowledge 16 in Las Vegas. I'm Kirsty McGowan. I'm here with Carlos Casanova.
Hello, Kirsty.
Charlie Betts.
Kirsty.
And it's our pleasure to be chatting with Roy Illsley from Ovum. Welcome, Roy.
Welcome, Kirsty. Thank you.
Hi, Roy, and welcome. I welcome you and Ovum here to the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about your current role and some of the things that you're most interested in and focused on right now at Ovum?
Yeah, sure, Charlie. I mean, basically, I cover strategy and strategic intent from where IT is used, how it's used, right away from the service management angle to serving the customer. And what we're finding that the big challenge with most organizations now is doing this, what is I'm sorry to use it, but a hype word, the digital transformation. It's moving your whole enterprise from being focused on doing things in an IT-centric way to doing things in a way that is actually a business-centric way using the IT to drive it. I mean, the well-documented case of Domino's Pizza is the one that everybody quotes. Yeah. Domino's now call themselves a technology company that delivers pizzas, not a pizza company that uses technology. And that's because they completely reinvented themselves. They've not just got a smart app to order your pizza on. They've connected everything behind the scenes so it really works. And technology is now driving that business. So if you think about the opportunities that gives Domino's, they can go into adjacent markets with the same model and implement it. They don't have to spend millions sort of crossing the wires over and soldering them together. So there's an awful lot of that focus that we're seeing. And our research that we did basically showed that most companies start on the customer experience end and then realize that actually they've created an app for that, and that's not actually doing what digital transformation is, and they're only now starting to transform IT capability.
So that's interesting. So you were talking about, in the Domino's example, how they can go into different regions, different areas. So global organizations that may have a U.S. presence, a Italian presence, a Latin American presence, how is that working? I mean, that's got to be a huge challenge for them, for the CEOs, the leadership. How do they do this digital transformation when culturally it's as diverse as it gets?
Yeah. It's not easy, and they have to have the mandate from the top, and it depends where they're headquartered, because a lot of North American companies try and drive into Europe and think it's the United States of Europe. Well, the EU may be a single entity, but oh no, the French have got their way of doing things, the Brits have got their way of doing things, the Germans have got theirs, Switzerland won't play with anybody, build a wall around it. You've got to realise that that's the situation. And then when you move out into Southeast Asia, you find all sorts of different other cultural and political drivers. I mean, I was in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand last year, and I met with the governments in each of those regions. And Singapore were going, we're building these big sheds and getting cloud computing here because we're making technology accessible to everyone. And now up the road in Malaysia, the Malaysian government were going, we don't want our Malaysian companies using Singapore's data centres.
No.
We're going to use data protection laws to keep data in Malaysia. And then strangely enough, another out the road in Bangkok, exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
So politics will demand an awful lot of change, an awful lot of decisions from what as CEOs and CIOs can and can't do. Because, I mean, another classic example is I was talking to a company, sorry I can't remember the name of it, last week, who were talking about the internet. And they were saying, do you realise that if you're in the Middle East, all your internet connections do not go from Saudi Arabia to Dubai, they go to Frankfurt and back. Because the politics of the Middle East will not allow them to connect the connections between countries. So you've got latency and jitter. And if you're trying to do something across those countries as a CEO, you have got to think about where the technology needs to be, what processes are in place, and what changes do I need to make. And service management will mean different outcomes in different companies, countries, different regions. So North America, it's all about sort of doing things in a standard formatted way that you can serve all the states of America. In Europe, it's more about doing things in ways that fit with the cultures of the countries. So the UK, ITIL-centric, obviously where it came from. The French, less so because it was a British invention. Germans,
Yeah.
they've got a better way of doing it because
Yes.
they're the Germans. So
Yeah.
everybody has different
You haven't mentioned the
approaches to it.
Italians anywhere along that.
Well, they do things slightly their way and slightly the other way, but they're sort of, they're less sort of fussy on it, I tend to find.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the Dutch took ITIL and made it
Yes.
theirs as well. So,
Oh, and then the Dutch really
Yeah.
sort of...
All
Yeah.
IT frameworks
Yeah.
seem to wind up back in the Netherlands.
They
or,
do,
Or
they
originating
do.
in some measure
Yeah.
from the Netherlands. I've
Yeah.
noticed it over and over again.
Because they're very, very
Yeah.
good at blending things
Yes.
and coming
Yeah.
up with compromise
Yes.
that practically works.
Yeah.
You know, as a country, their culture seems to be, we'll do this, and this
Yeah.
is how it works. I mean,
Yeah.
I spoke to the CIO of ING a couple of years ago, and their primary data center is at one end of Schiphol Airport, and their backup data center is at the other
Oh,
end of
yeah.
Oh,
Schiphol
right,
Airport.
Schiphol Airport.
And I
Right.
said, well, what happens if you have a flood? He says, Holland will have a bit bigger of a problem than not having a data centre.
Exactly. I think he's probably
So
very right there.
The practicalities of how to do
Yeah.
things are
Yes.
borne in mind.
But there's probably not a lot of latency between the primary and backup.
I don't know. Have you been to Schiphol Airport?
I haven't no, I didn't say in the lines inside because I experienced that about 3 weeks
Yeah.
ago. But I would think that the point that you just made about the Middle East, first thing that I thought of too is there's a risk component there too. So you
Yes.
have to understand it's not going between here and there. If it's going between from here to there through another mechanism, if you don't have that control and you don't recognize where it's going through, you might have introduced a tremendous amount of risk that otherwise it wouldn't have been apparent.
Yeah, and it's the risk, and it's also the fact that it might make something completely unusable.
Yes.
You think about the sort of the latency on an app that has got to go from Saudi Arabia to Frankfurt, from Frankfurt back to Dubai. That might make something completely unusable. So
Yes.
therefore, you've got to think, how am I going to service that customer, whether it's an internal or an external customer? Can I do it? Do I have to have a local presence?
Yeah.
Or am I going to serve them from a different place and in a different way?
Yeah.
And define your architecture for how you actually, at the end of the day, wind up writing the software and the caching and all of that. Yeah.
And I think that actually brings us to a very
Yeah.
interesting point. The whole role of architecture is now coming back to the fore as it's actually, as a discipline.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
We just had a
Yeah,
conversation.
we
about
did-
it.
we
Been-
did talk about that, didn't we? Yeah.
It's been very, very much. It was sort of like the architects sit over there and they do their fancy plans and
Yeah.
everybody else works. Now they're
Ignores
much
them.
more engaged.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's-
it's becoming much more important again
It
to
is.
get that architecture
And
right.
actually having an architecture for how you do operations and service
Yes.
management is okay because you have an architecture for certain things and then you get into IT operations or service management, you haven't got an architecture
No.
for that. It's sort of like, well, we've got bits of it.
Yeah.
You need to formalise it. You need to put the things together in a way that makes sense and will work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the the term that I use.
Toddlers are for children, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the architectural solution. It's not just the architecture just technical. It's not that. It's that full solution. Like you're saying, if it's got to go through somewhere else, well,
Yep.
architecturally, how do we need to change that in order to still deliver that need? We need to cache it. We need to do other pieces. We need to maybe break down the packets smaller to get them through faster, prioritize them differently, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And that's architecture.
Yeah.
That's
I think what Frank said this morning on stage was at the end was one of the most insightful things. Is it's not the change anywhere else but
No.
between your ears that's
Yes.
stopping you doing things. And
Yeah.
that's perfectly true.
Right.
You talk to anybody in IT, and they will know there's better ways of doing things. It's my job on the line.
Yep.
So, software-defined networking is a classic example. You talk to anybody about software-defined networking and you can see the value of it. You talk to a Cisco-certified network engineer earning 6 figures,
Yeah.
he can't see the value in it because
No.
actually it
I
sort of
wonder why.
means...
Awfully hard.
Or maybe he sees the value, but it's
Let's
just
see.
not
Yeah.
going to
No.
happen.
Yeah, there's an old quote. It's very difficult to convince somebody of something when their profit and their salary
Yeah.
depends on believing the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd like to talk a little bit about digital transformation. As we look at the mainstream of digital technology into the enterprise, I mean, for example, the CMO is going to have a bigger budget than the CIO. You've heard that. There's often an assumption that when all of this technology becomes mainstreamed, that the ugly old bureaucracy of IT will somehow just kind of evaporate. But I think we're seeing something very different. We're starting to see people under the CMO realizing, oh, change in configuration management, there are things that didn't go away just because the line reporting and the budget shifted.
Yep.
And so actually what happens is that IT, instead of the business taking over IT practices move into the business and start to transform it because the business is now dealing with this complexity that led us to create these practices.
Yeah, I mean, CMDB is a classic example. The CMDB came out of IT service management. It was built by the IT people for IT's use case. But as you heard this morning, Internet of Things, business functions, where best to keep information, keep the context of information, and then mine it.
Yeah.
It's in the CMDB.
Right.
But that takes people to understand what it is the CMDB is there for. And these business users don't get that. They want the outcome, not the actual hands-on coding bit.
Yeah.
The GRC people are going to educate them real quick. I mean, that Caterpillar DL7 tractor is now an endpoint on the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
But along that point, I mean, and obviously it's been a good part of my time on the config thing. We do it in other practices. And you look at you mentioned Caterpillar. I've worked with, one of the Cummins Diesel years ago. Anytime you go into a production manufacturing organization, even military logistics, how do you support the tank? And how it gets pieced together, the failure rate of parts, the supply chain part of it, all of that, in my opinion, I view it, it's raw data, right? That has some mechanism, whether it's about a tank or a phone, it doesn't matter. But how it gets pieced together and the instructions around it, that's all config management, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
So the Internet of Things, I've always kind of viewed it that way. But what caught my ear was you said, the business folks don't understand. I don't think most of the IT folks, these years later, still fully understand it because I don't see the investment up front to do it. And that's where they fail, is they don't commit to it, they don't believe in it wholly.
What they were doing, to be fair, they were sold the CMDB and then the vendor just walked away and left them with,
absolutely.
There you go, deal with it.
Yeah.
And
Install a database, you're all set, right? You've got the CMDB.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we can go down that far.
No,
that's a 2-hour.
That's another conversation.
That's for the next session.
Well, thanks for your time today, Roy. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And maybe we'll do this again.
Yeah, probably, almost certainly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.